Hey guys, tonight we drift into a world of mist and sea water where the only alarm clock is a screaming gull and your mattress is made of seal fur and regret. The air smells like salt, wet wool, and smoked fish, none of which are yours. You don't remember how you got here. One moment you were scrolling through your phone, the next, bam. You're half buried in kelp, toes numb, lungs filled with sea air that could freeze a priest's confessions solid. Welcome to Norway, somewhere around the year 750 CE. You're not dead, probably, but you might wish you were after one bite of the salty, fermented fish handed to you by a stranger with braided hair and a mild smirk. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. And if you're listening from somewhere unexpected, drop your country and local time in the comments. I love seeing where history lands. Your first few hours among these Norse folk are confusing. No one's trying to stab you, which is already a win, but they are speaking a language that sounds like someone angrily gargling poetry. You're cold, wet, and awkwardly aware that you're wearing sneakers in a society where the closest thing to shoes is leather wrapped around hope and horsehair. A woman with sharp eyes and a fur-lined hood tosses you a tunic, scratchy, woolen, and smells vaguely of goat. You nod in thanks. She nods back. No one says much. It's a quiet land, not because people are shy, but because the wind already does all the shouting. This is coastal Scandinavia, centuries before the word Viking means anything other than that guy who smells like firewood and poor decisions. The people around you don't see themselves as raiders, warriors, or heroes. They see themselves as survivors. And to survive here, you need three things: warmth, food, and a healthy distrust of wolves. The first thing you notice is how everyone is busy, even the children. One's sharpening a bone needle, another is smacking a rock with a different rock, which may or may not be educational. A man nearby is twisting rope out of dried seaweed, his fingers moving with the same rhythm as the sea lapping against the shore. You try to help but end up getting seaweed in your mouth. No one laughs, but they definitely notice. Then there's the food, or what passes for it: fish, more fish, and a flatbread so hard you could use it as a roof tile. You ask what's for dinner and someone says, fish stew, without breaking eye contact. You're not sure if it's a threat or just routine. But there's something comforting about the simplicity. The longhouse, the communal wooden structure everyone sleeps, eats, and argues in, smells of smoke, pine resin, and old stories. There's a hearth in the center and you're invited to sit. Someone hands you a carved wooden cup. Mead. It tastes like honey and something illegal. Over time, you start to learn the rhythm of this place. Morning begins when the frost melts just enough to unstick your eyelashes. Chores are not optional. You're given a task: weaving fishing nets with a woman named Astrid, who silently judges your every knot. You get better. Kind of. There are no clocks, no calendars, just the sun, the stars, and your aching back to tell you when it's time to stop. And in the evening, stories flow, not casual gossip, but full-on sagas told in a cadence that sounds like thunder trying to flirt with a tree. A man named Rurik tells of a time he wrestled a bear. Someone coughs, clearly not believing him. Rurik narrows his eyes and shrugs like, maybe it was just a hairy drunk guy, who's to say? The night deepens, and with it, a realization. These people are not waiting for history to happen. They are history, quietly, messily, stubbornly existing. They're not born warriors. They don't sing about Valhalla over breakfast. They're mostly farmers, herders, and fishermen just trying to avoid frostbite and family drama. But under that everyday survival is a tension, an itch for something more. You hear it in how the young men talk about lands across the sea. You see it in the way the older ones carve maps into wood scraps when they think no one's looking. The sea doesn't scare them, it calls them. You lay down on a fur mat near the fire, exhausted from hauling buckets of cod and pretending you know what flax is. The crackling logs whisper old things. There's no traffic, no hum of electricity, just your breath and theirs, rising like smoke into the rafters. You're not in Kansas anymore. You're in the early days of a storm that will soon be called the Viking Age. And the best part, nobody even knows it yet. Morning arrives the Viking way, without permission. The sun claws its way above the mountains like it's also tired of living this far north, and you wake up to the gentle encouragement of a goat stepping on your face. Welcome to Norse hospitality. The longhouse is stirring. Someone's already outside splitting logs, another is loudly clearing phlegm with the fury of a berserker. There's no such thing as privacy, just different shades of communal noise. You step outside, wool tunic still itchy, boots slightly too small, and the cold slices into your cheeks like a jealous ex. You're not in a town exactly, more like a loose cluster of homesteads. There are no walls, no roads, just paths beaten down by generations of trudging. People live scattered across fjords and forests, small families clinging to land that barely tolerates them. You ask where the town square is, and someone just points to a large flat rock where two chickens are currently arguing. But here's the thing, these people, they're not Vikings yet, not in their minds. That word doesn't exist for them as a noun. They are Norse, or more specifically, they are farmers. Fishermen, traders, craftsmen, they are folks trying to keep their goats from falling off cliffs and their children from stealing the winter ale, and that's already a full-time job. You help with the morning tasks. First, fetching water, which involves walking half a mile downhill to a stream that seems to actively mock your existence. Then there's feeding the pigs who behave like they own the place. A kid named Leaf shows you how to sling hay. You do it wrong 3 times. He doesn't laugh, but his pig does. What's stunning is the order within the hardship. Everything here has a rhythm, a quiet wisdom passed down without ceremony. You learn how to gut a fish without offending its spirit. You learn to kneel when entering a house so you don't eat a beam with your forehead. And you learn slowly to stop asking questions no one has time to answer. The houses are simple, wood, sod, sometimes stone, always smoky. Each one holds generations of memories, fights, feasts, and funerals. You watch as a grandmother mends a fishing net beside a teenage girl carving runes into a bone pendant. These aren't people stuck in the past. They're building a present that demands all their energy just to exist. And oh, the stories. Over dinner, if dried fish and boiled roots count, you're told how their ancestors came from even farther north, maybe the coast of Norway, maybe beyond. It's fuzzy. The sagas blend truth and metaphor like soup and seaweed. Someone mentions Odin walking the world in disguise. Someone else swears their great-grandfather punched a frost giant. No one corrects either claim. Truth is fluid here, like the fjords, cold, deep, and full of things you don't want to bump into in the dark. Historians still argue whether these early Norse were primarily seafarers from the start, or whether necessity slowly shoved them into boats. The archaeological record is tantalizing but incomplete. Some believe climate shifts around 700 CE, plus rising populations, pressured them to look outward. Others think it was just good old-fashioned ambition and maybe a little boredom. Because let's face it, long winters, small farms, and endless repetition can spark a desire to explore, or escape, or just hit someone with an axe and take their cheese. But at this point in your journey, there are no helmets with horns, no war cries, no firelit raids. These people are still becoming, still simmering, and in many ways, it's more impressive because it means the foundation of the Viking Age wasn't built in battle, but in baking bread without yeast, hauling stone by hand, and enduring winters that made even the gods complain. You finish the day helping to build a fence. It's crooked. The goats will mock you forever, but as you sit down that night, watching the northern lights dance like drunk spirits across the sky, someone sits beside you, doesn't say a word, just hands you a piece of dried apple and a look that says, "You did all right." And in that moment, for a flicker of time, you're not a visitor. You're a part of something older than kingdoms, a tribe maybe, a rhythm, a story with no name yet, but one that's just beginning to echo. The next morning you wake to the distinct sound of shouting, cheerful shouting, which is always a little unsettling. Turns out someone's sheep has gone rogue again and decided cliffs are optional. You watch as 3 people chase it across the frost-covered ridge, and for a moment you wonder if this is some kind of divine punishment. Then you realize this is just Tuesday in early Scandinavia. By now you've started to notice patterns, not just in daily chores, but in attitudes. There's a certain calm to these people. They don't panic when the firewood gets low. They chop more. They don't complain when the fish don't bite. They fish longer. There's no word for weekend here because nature doesn't take breaks, and neither do goats. This is where the real roots of Viking toughness grow. Not on the battlefield, but in the bone-deep patience of farming in a climate that's actively trying to kill you. The winters are long, the soil is stingy, and the mountains don't care about your feelings. But these people, they adapt. Every season, every hardship teaches them something. Sometimes that lesson is, don't trust the ice on the lake. Sometimes it's, don't name your chicken, you'll regret it later. But slowly, a tension brews. You hear it in the way the elders mutter about changing seasons, harsher winters, thinner yields. You see it in the eyes of young men, restless, curious, a little too quick to sharpen their axes. Something is shifting. You spend part of your day with a man named Egil. He's older, grey-bearded, and smells faintly of pine and boiled cabbage. He shows you the family's chest of heirlooms, a worn comb made of antler, a brooch shaped like a dragon, and a rusted sword with runes you can't read. He doesn't brag. He just says, my grandfather was not born here. He came from the east, by boat, running from something. Historians still debate where these early Norse truly originated. Were they descendants of Germanic tribes pushed northward by Roman pressure? Or were they indigenous to this frosty frontier all along? The DNA is mixed, the record scarce, and the truth slippery. What's clear is that they've always been on the edge, geographically, culturally, psychologically. This explains the strange mix of traits you see. They're practical. Everything is reused, repurposed, or buried ceremonially if broken. But they're also dreamers, not the poetic kind, the I bet there's land across that frozen death-trap ocean kind, big, stubborn dreams with splinters. You hear tales of faraway places, the rich lands to the south, the warmer shores, where winters are rumors. Some of these stories are probably true, some are definitely not. But it doesn't matter. They all spark something, because when survival becomes routine, curiosity becomes dangerous. That evening, you gather by the hearth again. The elders speak of the old days when their people were fewer but freer, when the forests were thicker, the rivers colder, and no one had yet tried to name the stars. One man scoffs and says the gods are angry. Another shrugs and blames the goats. Both might be right. Later, you sit outside alone, wrapped in a blanket that smells like 3 generations of sheep. You look at the stars. They're the same stars you know, but colder, somehow, farther. And you realize these people live with the world, not in spite of it. They don't try to control the land. They listen to it, even when it screams. And somewhere deep beneath this quiet life, beneath the frost, the fire, the flatbread, there's an energy, a pressure building, like the moment before a wave rises. Something's coming. Not tomorrow, maybe not this year, but soon. They don't call themselves Vikings yet, but they will, you wake up to the sound of sawing. Not wood, but someone sawing ice, which is both impressive and deeply concerning. Apparently, the local river has frozen just enough to ruin everyone's week. Someone's fallen in, someone else is yelling at a sled, a third person is building what may or may not be a sauna. It's hard to say. Life here doesn't pause for weather. It leans into it with the enthusiasm of someone who's never had the luxury of central heating. Today you're helping repair a longhouse roof that's partially collapsed under snow and the weight of a drunk, raccoon-sized fox that refuses to move. While you pass bundles of thatch to a teenage boy with frost in his eyebrows, he tells you about a nearby village that recently lost 3 men to a storm spirit. You raise an eyebrow. He shrugs. Could have also been a bear. The line between myth and practical explanation is thin, wobbly, often ignored. And this, oddly, is where the story of the Vikings starts to truly take shape. Not with conquest or fire, but with craftsmanship, with resourcefulness. You watch as 3 older men argue over how to carve a new prow for a boat, not because they disagree, but because they're bored and it's too cold to fight wolves today. The boat they're working on is something else entirely, sleek, narrow, elegant, in a way that seems impossible given the tools they're using. It's called a nar, and though it's not the infamous longship, it's the reliable cousin, the cargo hauler, the deep-sea explorer. You run your fingers along its wooden ribs. It feels alive, like it remembers every wave it's ever cut through. These early shipbuilders didn't have blueprints. They had bone-deep memory, sacred geometry, and weather-hardened hands. And as you observe their work, you begin to understand. The sea wasn't just a path to these people. It was destiny. It was the only road that didn't end in snowdrift or starvation. Historians still debate how and when the Norse mastered such ship design. Some believe it evolved from fishing boats made for hugging the coastline. Others argue there was outside influence, perhaps through contact with Roman or even Baltic shipbuilders. But no matter the origin, what matters is this: the ships work. They glide across water that should break them. They dance with the waves. And they carry everything: goods, goats, gossip, and eventually gods. You're asked to help caulk the seams of a smaller boat, sealing it with tar and sheep's wool. Your hands are soon black with pitch. You look ridiculous. The others are kind enough not to say it, except one old man who points and says, "Your hands look like Loki made bread." You accept this as a compliment. Probably. As the day winds down, the boats are pulled back to shore and covered. Fires are lit, food is passed around, there's dried fish, flat bread, and a stew that tastes like someone lost a bet with a mushroom. A small child offers you a carved wooden figure, a tiny ship with a dragon head. You ask if it's a toy. He shakes his head. No, it listens. You decide not to ask follow-up questions. That night, the wind howls through the valley like something angry or lonely. You lie awake beneath wool blankets, watching shadows flicker across the ceiling. Ships. They keep showing up in the stories, the songs, the dreams. They're not just tools here, they're portals. To food, to war, to somewhere else, somewhere better. And as your eyes begin to drift closed, you realize it won't be long before someone decides to follow the waves beyond the edge of their world. And once they do, no one will be safe, not even the monks. The next morning, the air is crisp enough to slice bread with. You open your eyes to see frost blooming across the ceiling beams like tiny white antlers. Someone's already outside chopping wood like it owes them money. Another person stomps past you, mumbling about mischievous spirits and blisters from stupid boots. Welcome back to Viking country, where the weather is always trying to kill you, and you are expected to kill it first. Today's a big day. You're going raiding. Well, not you exactly, more like you're being dragged along because someone mistook your nervous pacing as enthusiasm. You're given a helmet. It does not have horns. It barely fits your head. You're told to stop complaining or else the village seer will curse your ankles. Fair enough. The plan is to take a small boat out to a monastery on a distant island. Not for bloodshed, more of a grab what you can and don't break the nice goblets kind of vibe. They call it Viking, a word that at this point in history still functions more like a verb than a label. To go Viking means to go adventuring, raiding, or politely stealing. It's not yet a culture, it's a side hustle. Historians still argue whether the earliest Viking raids were spontaneous stunts or the result of larger economic pressures. Was it overpopulation, famine, a shortage of shiny things, or did some poor monk just leave the front door open one day and everything snowballed from there? Either way, you're now in a boat with 7 sweaty men and a goat headed toward a piece of land that doesn't know what's coming. The journey is wet, loud, and full of arguments about whether seagulls are a good omen or a sign of certain death. You try to be helpful. You fail. You vomit. Someone pats your back and says, "That means the gods noticed you." You're not sure that's a good thing. Eventually, the coastline appears. Low, grassy, peaceful. Too peaceful. You pull ashore. The monastery is quiet. You can hear wind through the stone arches and somewhere the bleating of a confused sheep. The others move like they've done this before. They don't smash and burn, not yet. They just take cups, books, cloth. One man finds a bell and seems delighted beyond reason. Another insists on taking a wooden crucifix because, quote, it has nice craftsmanship. There's no rage here, no bloodlust. Just efficiency, precision, polite looting. And then, as you're about to leave, a monk appears. He's barefoot. He's older than the concept of soup. He looks directly at you and says nothing, just stares. You freeze. Everyone freezes. Then one of your group steps forward and offers the monk a piece of dried fish. Silence. The monk takes it, nods, and walks away. You leave a little more confused about morality than when you arrived. That night, back on shore, the loot is divided. Some of it is kept, some bartered, some simply shown off. But what's more important than the things is the feeling. The sea has been crossed, a boundary has been broken, something ancient has stirred. You overhear someone say, "Maybe next time we go farther." Another replies, "There's talk of gold across the channel." A third simply says, "I liked the bread. It was warm. The seed is planted. They've tasted movement, wind in their teeth, uncertainty in their bellies. And it feels better than survival. It feels like purpose." You lie down in your usual spot beside the fire. Your hands still smell like salt and sheep. And as your eyes drift shut, you realize the shift has begun. These people will never again be content with just farming, just fishing. The age of quiet patience is ending. Soon they won't just go Viking. They'll become Vikings. The fire pops beside you, sending a tiny ember spiraling upward like a firefly with ambition. You don't sleep much that night, not because of the cold or the snoring, though both are impressive, but because of the buzzing energy in the air. Something's changed. Something's cracked open. The people around you aren't just survivors anymore. They've become interested in more. And you've just been drafted into the Viking equivalent of startup culture. There's no health plan. There is a high risk of axe-related injuries, but the team morale, off the charts. You now notice things that went unspoken before. Maps, for one. Not the kind you'd recognize. These are etched onto bone or wood or the inside of a leather strap. Curved lines suggesting coastlines, little marks where someone's cousin saw a big rock. But to these people, it's gospel, geography, theology, and wishful thinking all rolled into one. You sit with an older man, Styrbjörn, whose back curves like a question mark. He doesn't talk much, but today he offers a tale of a land where the rivers run backwards and the women throw spears. You ask where it is. He shrugs. Southish? This is where the myth-making begins. You can feel it. Vikings don't discover new places and shrug. They turn every journey into a legend, every storm into a test from Thor. And that monastery raid, already growing in the retelling, it now involves a bear, a cursed chalice, and someone insisting they politely asked before taking the cheese. But this isn't just storytelling, it's momentum. You see it in the shipyards, 3 new hulls being laid. You see it in the way young men practice throwing spears at hay targets with names like Foreign Trader and Annoying Uncle. Something is brewing. Not war, not yet, but, ambition. And ambition needs a fleet. Historians still argue whether Viking expansion was planned or reactive. Were they pushed out by internal strife and climate pressure, or pulled outward by trade, greed, and sheer curiosity? The truth is probably yes to all of it. History rarely chooses one flavor. Today, you're invited to help on a ship, not sailing, building. Turns out your reputation as the stranger who didn't drown has earned you some points. You're handed a chisel. It's older than your entire apartment building. You promptly drop it. Nobody yells. But someone mutters, "Maybe let him carry the smaller logs." The longship is a marvel. Long, narrow, shallow-drafted, so it can glide through rivers, hug coastlines, and, in a pinch, be carried overland. Every board is bent with fire, sealed with tar, and secured with nails made from the smiles of blacksmiths who never sleep. You help polish the dragon-headed prow, a snarling, twisted beast with exaggerated fangs and enormous eyes. Not just for show, these figureheads are meant to scare off spirits, enemies, and probably gulls. By mid-afternoon, your hands are blistered, and your respect for Norse craftsmanship has multiplied tenfold. Everything is built to last, except your spine, apparently. You learn something else, too. Community matters here, in a way that's hard to describe. No one works alone. The old teach the young do the heavy lifting. And you're part of the chain now, even if your contribution is mostly enthusiasm and bruised thumbs. Later, around the fire, someone asks you to tell a story. You panic. Then you remember a tale, something from your world, a myth, maybe about Prometheus, or a modern twist on an old Greek tragedy. You don't get far before someone interrupts. Too many gods, not enough axes. Fair enough. The night ends with song, low, rhythmic, half chant, half lullaby. Not beautiful exactly, but honest. You lie there, staring at the ceiling, thinking about ships and maps and rivers that run backwards. And you realize this isn't the start of a Viking raid. This is the start of an identity. A people building the tools, the myths, and the momentum to become more than just themselves. It begins with a story, then a boat, then a wind that won't stop blowing. And you're right here where it all starts, with hands full of pitch, a mouth full of smoke, and a heart starting to beat in rhythm with the sea. When the sun finally peeks over the mountains the next morning, it looks reluctant, like it too knows what's coming. You wake up with pine needles in your hair and your mouth tasting like someone barbecued a leather boot. You sit up slowly, stretching, sore from yesterday's flirtation with Norse manual labor. Somewhere nearby, someone is yelling at a chicken with deeply personal venom. Another day begins. Only now there's tension, excitement, whispers. You're not the only one who feels it. Something is happening. The young men have stopped carving wooden toys and started sharpening real blades. The women are grinding herbs with more intensity than usual. The blacksmith is working overtime, and the forge is glowing like an angry star. But before anything goes raiding or burning or looting, you're roped into something even more terrifying, a village meeting. The longhouse fills with people, beards, braids, big opinions. There's no stage, no microphone, just a fire in the center and voices rising around it. You sit near the back, next to a dog that may or may not be in charge. A tall man named Ketil speaks first. Broad shoulders, missing a few teeth, definitely wrestled at least one seal in his life. "There's talk," he says, "of lands across the narrow sea, green, fat lands, monks, gold, sheep that don't fight back." A chuckle ripples through the room. But others are less amused. An elder named Friedis raises her voice, asking the question everyone's afraid to say out loud. If we become raiders, do we lose who we are? It's not rhetorical. You can feel the silence harden around it. Because up until now, this community has been built on hard work, shared firewood, and the occasional ghost story. Raiding? That's a shift. That's not just travel, that's identity altering. Historians still argue whether these early forays were economic acts of desperation or cultural expressions of power. Was it about wealth or reputation? Was it opportunism or an assertion of presence? The sagas suggest one thing. The bones in graves sometimes say another. Eventually, a compromise is reached, a small crew, a scouting expedition. They'll go see, maybe trade, maybe raid, depending on what the gods and weather allow. You nod as if you have any say in this. The dog beside you sneezes in approval. The next few days are filled with preparation, not just weapons, but food, supplies, talismans, spells whispered into knots of string tied to the boat's ribs. You help load barrels of dried fish, bundles of wool, jars of honey, and a suspicious number of axes. You're handed a water skin and a hatchet just in case. You ask what the case might be. The response is a wink and hope you can swim. The night before departure, the village gathers for a feast. And by feast, we mean a loud event with slightly less stale bread than usual. There's storytelling, singing, and a drinking competition involving something that tastes like fermented courage and regret. Someone plays a bone flute. Badly, a man tries to flirt using a dead fish as a prop. It almost works. And in the middle of it all, someone stands to recite a saga. Not an old one, a new one. About a stranger from another land who came from the sea and walked among them. About boats and omens and goats that spoke in dreams. You realize it's about you. You've become part of the story now, an echo in their lore. And whether or not any of it is true doesn't matter. The telling makes it so. You sleep that night on the boat, curled under a fir, listening to the gentle lap of waves. The stars above are cold and patient. They've watched this happen before. A people stand at the edge of themselves, squinting into the unknown. Tomorrow you set sail. And this time you're not just an observer. You're in the crew. Morning hits like a slap from Thor himself. The wind smells like salt, the sky is a wash of bleak grey, and your boots are already soaked before you even reach the dock. You stand there, blinking at the longship like it's a dragon that just yawned. It's bigger than you remember, long, narrow, slightly terrifying. The dragon-head prow glares out to sea like it knows things, bad things. You climb aboard, awkward and shivering, trying to appear more useful than you are. The crew joins in quiet efficiency, no cheers, no battle cries, just the soft thunk of barrels, the creak of wood, and the occasional grunt that probably translates to, "Don't drop the honey again." As the boat pulls away from shore, you glance back at the village. Smoke rising, tiny figures waving, dogs barking because they assume all boats lead to doom. And just like that, you're gone. The land becomes smaller, flatter, until it melts into mist. Welcome to the open sea. Now here's something they didn't warn you about. The sea doesn't care about your dreams. It doesn't care about your courage, your carefully packed fish, or your handmade lucky charm from Astrid. The sea wants to unmake you, and it nearly does. Waves slam the hull like a drunk uncle trying to get into a locked door. Water sprays into your face every 3 minutes like clockwork. Someone behind you is already throwing up. You lose track of time. You lose track of your stomach. You lose your hat. But the others, the crew, they're fine. They move like dancers, wet, grumpy dancers with weapons and incredible balance. One is singing, another is carving something into the rail. They don't look afraid, they look alive. You spend the next few hours learning how to bail water with a bucket, then with your hands, then with whatever's not nailed down. You get shouted at twice for sitting where the sacred barrel goes. You don't ask what's in the barrel. Some questions are best left unasked. At some point, land appears, low, flat, suspiciously green. The sails come down, oars dip in. The rhythm of rowing fills the air, deep, slow, almost hypnotic. You join in, arms aching, lungs burning. You're pretty sure you're rowing backwards, but no one stops you. Maybe it's tradition. As you approach shore, someone taps your shoulder and hands you a helmet. Again, no horns, just a dented iron cap and a look that says, "Don't embarrass us." The target? A small coastal settlement, not a monastery this time, a trade outpost. Word is they have silver, tools and, most importantly, salted pork. The landing is smooth, too smooth. You step into knee-high water and immediately fall on your face. Your dignity floats away somewhere between the oars. The others spread out like a tide of very well-dressed burglars. Some knock on doors, others peek in windows. A few just stand there, looking menacing until someone offers them a necklace. There's no massacre, no fire, just chaotic bartering. And yes, some light looting, but polite looting. One woman insists you take a basket of apples. You try to decline. She insists harder. You now own 36 apples. Back at the ship, the mood is high. Silver jingles. Someone's wearing a new belt. One man found a mirror and hasn't stopped admiring himself since. You sit with your feet dangling off the side, watching the shoreline shrink again. It wasn't a war, it wasn't even a raid, really. It was a test of skill, of distance, of possibility. And what they discovered, what you discovered, is that it's possible. The boats work, the crew works. The world is not just a scary, endless ocean. It's a map waiting to be drawn. Historians still argue whether these early expeditions were exploratory, opportunistic, or full-blown strategic. But from where you're sitting, salt in your mouth, axe by your side, apples under your butt, it feels like a revelation. This is no longer about survival. It's about becoming something new. The sea doesn't look so big anymore. By the time you return to the village, your face is sunburned, your legs are sea-logged, and your mind is full of questions like, was that really a good trade? And why did we take 2 goats? You're greeted not with fanfare, but with nods, quick handshakes, and someone tossing you a hunk of cheese that may or may not still be alive. In Viking culture, that counts as a parade. The longship is pulled ashore, cleaned and blessed by the local vulva, a spiritual woman who smells like burning herbs and unresolved trauma. She chants over the dragon prow, spits twice, then leaves without explanation. No one questions it. You definitely don't. Life resumes, but it's not the same. Everyone walks a little taller. There's a spark behind the eyes, a whisper going around the fire, that this is just the beginning. You, too, feel it. A restlessness, a sense that the world isn't some cold, faraway place, but a place you can reach if you row hard enough and don't fall out. But raiding, it turns out, isn't a lifestyle, it's a punctuation mark. The real Viking life, it's what happens in between. You start to notice the quiet magic in everyday routines, the way fish is dried on wooden racks with obsessive care, The way children carve toy boats, imitating the real ones, complete with tiny paddles and terrifyingly accurate dragon heads. The way disputes are settled not by duels, well, not always, but by long, passive-aggressive discussions around the hearth. You visit a neighboring homestead and are immediately put to work milking a goat that clearly hates you. The family welcomes you with bread, beer, and that uniquely Norse silence that says, "We respect you but don't talk too much." Inside their home you meet Sigrid, the matriarch. She's maybe 40, maybe 60. It's hard to tell because her stare could break stone. She manages the household with terrifying grace, organizing trade, raising kids, brewing mead, whispering spells over her husband's bad knee. You're told she once slapped a tax collector so hard his helmet spun. This isn't unusual. Viking women, especially in rural communities, have power, real power, not symbolic, not decorative. They own land, run farms, some even sail. You listen as Sigrid negotiates a grain exchange, intimidates a neighbor, then sings a lullaby so sad it makes the fire flicker. Historians are still piecing together just how socially mobile women in Norse society were. Graves filled with weapons suggest female warriors may have existed, not just in saga but in real life, and magical practices, Seder, were often led by women. To call them housewives is like calling Odin a guy with a bird. Back at the village, you help rebuild a chicken coop destroyed by what someone swears was an angry ghost with feathers. Then you help prepare for a coming festival. There's food, music, a brief wrestling match between cousins that ends in a draw and mild limping. It's here, surrounded by laughter and burnt fish, that you understand something vital. Viking culture isn't just about ships and raids. It's about roots, land, kin, shared labor, shared silence, a weird, scratchy, violent, beautiful kind of cohesion. Later that night, you sit with Astrid by the fire, the same Astrid who once scolded you for tying knots like a blind squirrel. She asks if you liked your first raid. You hesitate, then say, "It was loud." She laughs, passes you a flask and says, "Good. The sea teaches you faster than we do." You take a sip and taste honey, herbs, and possibly regret. You don't know when the next journey will come, but you know this: when it does, you'll be ready. Not because you've mastered sailing or swordplay, you haven't, but because you belong now, not as a guest, not even as an outsider, but as part of the rhythm. And in a world this harsh, that's the closest thing to immortality. By now you've fallen into the rhythm of Norse life so deeply that waking up to silence feels suspicious. No chickens screaming, no pigs accusing, no one throwing buckets of water at goats or yelling about missing boots. Just stillness and the faint smell of something burning, which alarmingly seems normal. You walk outside and find yourself alone beneath a grey sky, mist curling through the pine trees like ghosts stretching their legs. The village feels paused until you hear it. A low chanting, distant and rhythmic, like someone arguing with the wind. You follow the sound and find everyone gathered on a low hill near the fjord, surrounding a stone altar you swear wasn't there yesterday. Standing before it is Volva Ranvi, the village seeress. Her cloak flaps dramatically. Her hair is half braided, half wild. Her eyes are the kind that make you question all your life choices, including last night's soup. She's leading a ritual, an offering to the gods, not for war, not even for luck. It's for wisdom, because tonight the sky will open, the stars will shift, and the spirits might answer. Also, it's harvest season, and no one wants another potato incident like last year. You're pulled into the ceremony with no warning and handed a horn full of what smells like sadness and fermented moss. You sip. You regret. Your soul briefly leaves your body. Then the chanting deepens. A small fire is lit. Symbols are drawn in ash, and a tale begins, not spoken but sung, of Odin, the All-Father, who gave up his eye for wisdom, of Loki, the beautiful liar, whose tricks always teeter between hilarious and apocalyptic, of Thor, the Thunderer, who once mistook a wedding veil for a battle helmet. Honestly, it's less divine majesty and more family drama with lightning. The stories pour out like honey and blood and beer. You're swept up in them, not as fables but as living memories. These gods aren't distant. They eat, rage, flirt, and stumble through life like everyone else. They are flawed, petty, hilarious, and deeply loved. The line between myth and history here is thin, almost decorative. You ask someone afterward if the gods are real, they shrug. As real as boats, she says. And those float, don't they? Historians still debate how seriously the Norse took their gods. Were they allegories, ancestors, cosmic metaphors, or just great stories to survive long winters and longer silences? There are bones, amulets, and temple ruins. But belief doesn't fossilize. What we know is that belief shaped behavior. Offerings were made, oaths were sworn, names were whispered before battle, and curses flung like axes. After the ritual, life returns to its usual pace, but everything feels more vivid. You start noticing runes carved into doorposts, tiny bone charms tied to fishing nets, superstitions spoken like facts. Don't step over a sleeping man. His soul might not find his body again. Good to know. Astrid teaches you how to read a few runes. You carve your name, well, kind of, into a piece of driftwood. It looks like a broken fence post, but she nods approvingly. Not bad, she says. Could be a protection rune, or it says clumsy. Hard to say. You learn that sagas aren't just entertainment, they're glue, social code, history book, therapy session. The difference between a lesson and a legend is usually how drunk the storyteller was. One man claims he once saw Thor's hammer fall from the sky during a storm. Another swears his cousin is descended from a frost giant, and honestly, judging by the cousin's height, it checks out. But more than anything, you start to realize this. For the Norse, gods and people share a strange intimacy. Not master and servant, not creator and creation, but kin. The gods stumble, cheat, weep, and occasionally turn into animals to seduce things. They are gloriously human and yet somehow divine. And in a world where crops fail, sea monsters exist, and your neighbor might be a berserker with insomnia, that kind of God makes sense. You don't need perfection, you need companionship in the chaos. That night, by the fire, you retell a piece of the saga you heard. The others listen. One corrects your pronunciation, another adds a verse you missed. By the end, it's become your story, slightly distorted, slightly improved, like all good myths. You fall asleep, wondering if any of it was real. Then you dream of a one-eyed man, a snarling wolf, and a hammer humming like thunder in the distance. You don't wake afraid. You wake belonging. You wake up gasping, not from a nightmare, but from accidentally inhaling a mouthful of smoke. Someone's trying to restart the hearth by lighting kindling with what smells like goat fat and disappointment. You cough politely and roll over, still tasting ash and vaguely dreaming of Odin offering you a cough drop. Outside, the wind is restless. Clouds hang low like the sky itself is eavesdropping. You've grown used to the rhythms of this place, the calls of the crows, the grumble of a waking village, the musical argument of two brothers over whose axe is shinier. But today there's something new in the air, a word being whispered from mouth to mouth. Viking. You've heard it before, of course. Tossed around during raids, muttered like a dare. But now it feels weightier, intentional, no longer just a verb for adventuring or light seasonal theft. It's becoming something else, an identity, maybe, a role, a name for those who go out into the world and make it louder. You ask Astrid what it means. She shrugs. It means you don't plan to come home for dinner. But the word itself is slippery. Some say it comes from Vik, a bay or inlet. Others say it's from Vika, a sea root. One old man insists it comes from Vink, meaning to make someone cry and steal their soup. But he's probably messing with you. Historians today still argue over its exact origin. Noun? Verb? Job title? Self-appointed lifestyle choice? No consensus. Only mystery. You join a gathering in the Longhouse where a visiting trader, mud-spattered and smug, is describing his journey from the south. He speaks of markets full of silks, coins stamped with unfamiliar faces, and cities with walls. Actual stone walls. Everyone gasps, someone faints, someone else pretends not to be impressed. But more interesting than his wares is his fear. He talks about attacks, boats appearing from the mist, villages burned, priests stripped naked and sent into the woods. The Northmen, he calls them, as if they're a species, not a direction. He doesn't know it, but he's describing you, or at least people like you. That's when it clicks. Outside these fjords, the world is starting to talk. Whispers of wild men from the sea, of dragon ships and screaming raids, of helmets wrongly imagined with horns, and warriors who laugh while bleeding. And the Norse, they're hearing it too. The name Viking isn't something they gave themselves. Not at first. It's something they earned through fear, confusion, and the need for other cultures to categorize the chaos. But now it's a label they're starting to wear with a crooked grin. At dinner, someone jokingly refers to himself as Halfdan the Viking. Another suggests getting matching cloaks. A third proposes a team chant, but gets a ladle thrown at his head. The point is, it's catching on. But not everyone's thrilled. The village elder, Ranveig, gives a warning. A name can lift you, but it can also trap you. She speaks of the danger in letting the world define you before you define yourself, of stories becoming cages, of reputations that grow teeth. Still, the shift is undeniable. You feel it even in the children's games. No longer just make-believe farmers and goats. Now it's tiny raiders swinging sticks and yelling "to Viking" while chasing ducks. You suspect this is historically inaccurate. The ducks do not care. The blacksmith too seems infected. He's forging swords now, real ones. Not for farming or ceremony, but for stabbing. He lets you hold one. It's heavy, cold, and buzzing with potential. You swing it once and almost decapitate a sheep. The sheep glares. You apologize. The sword stays. That night you sit with Astrid and a few others around the fire. You talk about names, about how they change things, how they shape what comes next. Astrid tells a story of a man who named himself Stormwalker and died of a mild cough. The gods have a sense of humor, she says. You ask what you should be called. She thinks for a long time. Then she says, Skjaldmær, a shield maiden, not because of your skill, but because you watch, you listen, you carry the stories. It's not an insult. It's a beginning. And as the fire crackles and your eyes grow heavy, you understand. Names matter, but what matters more is what you do with them. The world may one day call you a Viking, but tonight you're simply a soul by the fire, learning how to live in a story that's only just starting to sharpen its edges. You wake up to the sound of hammering, not the musical, rhythmic kind. This is urgent hammering, the kind that says either a ship is being born or someone's roof is falling off mid-blizzard. Turns out it's both. You step outside to find half the village trying to build a dock extension while the other half is arguing about which funeral pyres are still technically legal. You're pulled into the chaos by Eagle, who hands you a bucket and says, "Don't spill this." You do immediately. It was full of tar. Your boots are now permanent. The energy in the village has shifted again. The term Viking is in full circulation now, spoken with pride, amusement, or, depending on the speaker, Mild exasperation. It's a label that's moved from being whispered into becoming a badge, a performance, a brand. And nothing says we've made it like a good funeral. Today, you're helping prepare for a burial. A local trader, Harold Bonetooth, named, you're told, for a very unfortunate dental condition, has passed away after choking on a turnip. His final request: to be buried with his boat, his sword, and his mistress. The last part has been politely vetoed. You follow the procession to a nearby ridge overlooking the sea. The boat is there, small but beautiful. Carved runes snake along its edges. Inside, blankets, weapons, a few coins, some dried fish, and what appears to be a stolen bell. Everyone pretends not to notice. The vulva circles the boat, whispering chants that sound suspiciously like passive-aggressive insults aimed at Odin. People take turns laying offerings. You're handed a carved figure and told to say something meaningful. You mutter a confused prayer about wind direction. The gods remain silent. Then the fire is lit. The flames climb high, painting the sky in orange and black. The wind grabs the smoke and pulls it toward the sea. No one speaks. Even the goats fall silent. You watch as a man, a life, becomes ash, legend, and possibly dinner for seagulls, and it hits you. This isn't just farewell, it's a statement, a declaration. I mattered, I was here, I chose my exit, and it involved dramatic lighting. Viking burials are varied. Sometimes it's ship burials like this, sometimes it's cremation, sometimes it's burial mounds with eerie treasures, and sometimes, for those with less flair, it's just under the cabbage patch and don't tell the chickens. Archaeologists have found everything from swords to slaves to peacock bones in Viking graves, suggesting a complex relationship with death, memory, and showmanship. Historians still debate what these graves meant. Were they acts of devotion, public spectacle, insurance policies for the afterlife? One theory suggests grave goods were meant to impress the gods. Another says they were meant to impress the neighbors, probably both. Later that evening, you're invited to the funeral feast, which in classic Viking fashion is part mourning, part drinking contest, and part karaoke with axes. There's food, boiled meats, smoked fish, and a mysterious brown stew you don't ask too many questions about. There's mead, sticky, sweet, strong enough to erase regrets and cause new ones. And there are stories. So many stories. People stand one by one to share memories of Harold Bonetooth. Most are lies, glorious, exaggerated lies, about battles he didn't win, women he didn't woo, and a time he may or may not have punched a bear in self-defense. But it doesn't matter. The lie is the truth now. It's how he'll be remembered. You sit back, sipping your fourth horn of something flammable, and realize how much these people understand memory. They don't record history, they perform it. Every tale is a stitch in the tapestry, every death a spark that lights another saga. Later, after the fires died down and half the village is asleep on various flat surfaces, you find yourself walking alone along the beach. The ashes from Harold's pyre still drift in the tide. A carved spoon washes up near your foot. You leave it there. Feels like it's not yours to take. Above, the stars shimmer like 1,000 tiny ship lanterns. You remember the phrase someone muttered earlier, "To die well is to live twice." And as the waves lap at your ankles, you wonder, what will they say about you? The day after the funeral, the village is quiet, not out of grief, but hangover management. You step outside into the sharp sting of cold air, which slaps you across the face like a disapproving aunt. Around you, people emerge one by one from longhouses like confused, half-baked loaves of bread. Somewhere, someone's still singing, or possibly crying. It's hard to tell with that much mead in the mix. But hangovers or not, life does not pause in the north. Not for gods, not for funerals, not even for turnip-induced death. Today, you're helping unload a trader's boat that arrived while most of the village was passed out in goat pens. It's full of goods, salt, iron, fabrics dyed in colors you didn't think existed in this century. And it's not just from nearby settlements. This ship came from a far place, east, maybe even south. This is your first true look at what Viking life is really evolving into. Not just raids, not just rituals, but commerce. Not every ship sets sail with blood in mind. Some go looking for silver, spices, or soap. A few people here are visibly confused by its presence. The village square turns into a makeshift market. You watch as finely woven linen is traded for furs. A beaded necklace is exchanged for 6 eels and a promise. Someone buys a horseshoe and receives unsolicited marriage advice as change. It's loud, chaotic, and weirdly effective. You meet a woman named Ingebjörg who shows you her latest invention, a wooden device that makes butter faster. You're skeptical until she makes you churn with the old method. 10 minutes in, your arms are noodles and you're begging the gods for mercy. Ingebjörg's butter churner, meanwhile, is the height of Norse innovation. She tells you she might take it west to trade. People love butter, she says. She's not wrong. Viking towns, real, permanent ones, are starting to sprout across the known world. Places like Hedeby, Rybe, Birka. Settlements built not just for war, but for living, selling, storing, and sometimes very elaborate complaining. These are hubs where east meets west, and where you can trade a barrel of salted fish for a brooch from Baghdad, if you haggle well enough. Historians still debate just how much influence Viking trade had on shaping early medieval Europe. Coins from the Islamic Caliphate have been found in Swedish graves. Amber from the Baltic ended up in Byzantium. It's clear the Vikings weren't just marauders, they were middlemen, diplomats in fur cloaks with axes and questionable hygiene. You get roped into helping a merchant stack crates of soapstone. As you lift one, you notice it's carved with strange patterns, symbols that don't look Norse. From the east, he says, tapping the stone like it has a heartbeat. Land of silk and smoke. We trade there now. You blink. How far is that? He shrugs. Far enough that we can't pronounce anything, but close enough to want their spices. You stand there for a while holding that stone, thinking about how far these people have come. In just a few generations, they've gone from scratching out life on rocky farms to weaving themselves into the fabric of the world's trade routes. Not just raiders, not just farmers, connectors. And yet the heart of the culture still beats loud. The stories, the rituals, the jokes about Thor's hammer and Loki's questionable parenting skills. You pass a group of kids play-acting a raid. One pretends to die dramatically, then immediately asks for a snack. That evening a feast is thrown, not to honor the dead this time, but to honor the deal-makers, the traders who risk calm seas and customs taxes to bring home good cheese and shiny things. There's music, laughter. A man gets so drunk he insists he invented coinage. You sit beside Astrid, watching it all, and she leans over to whisper. Everyone talks about raiding, but trade, that's what feeds the gods. The gods don't want blood, they want gifts. You remember something Ranve once muttered. Gold lasts longer than glory. And maybe in their own chaotic way, these Vikings already knew that, because while stories fade, a good belt buckle can outlive empires. You sleep well that night, dreaming of silk roads, camel caravans, and the idea that maybe one day someone will call this strange, loud, awkward little community a civilization. You wake to the distant clang of metal on metal, a sound that could mean either breakfast or a blacksmith's existential crisis. Turns out it's both. The forge has been going since before dawn, and you stumble outside to find a circle of men arguing over whether the newest batch of swords should be slightly longer for intimidation purposes or slightly shorter, so we stop hitting ourselves by accident. It's another day in the life of a people who are rapidly outgrowing their borders. The raids have grown bolder, the trade routes busier. The gods, Well, they're probably exhausted from all the prayers flying around. And you're just trying to avoid the goat that has now decided it hates you personally. But today feels different. It's not a festival, not a funeral, not even a village fight over who took the last of the decent beer. It's a departure, a real one. A new settlement is being launched across the sea. Not just a raid or a scouting trip, but a full-blown colonization effort. Tools, seeds, livestock, children, wives. This isn't a trip. It's an exodus with style. The ship being used is massive, double-rowed, with carved dragon heads fore and aft so no one can tell which way it's facing, confusing both enemies and most of the crew. Ropes are coiled, sails patched, barrels loaded. You help lift one marked with a rune that probably means "do not drink without divine permission." Someone winks and tells you it's fermented bear milk. You choose not to verify. There's excitement in the air, but also unease. Some villagers worry this is moving too fast, that the culture is stretching itself too thin. "We're not farmers anymore," one elder mutters. "We're landlords." You nod, unsure if that's worse. Still, the draw of new land is strong. Europe's defences are catching on. Coastal villages are fortifying. Some kings are even learning how to pronounce Viking properly before declaring war. It's getting harder to surprise people, and no one likes a raid that ends in paperwork. Historians still argue what drove this Viking diaspora: overcrowding, ambition, climate shifts, a desire to stop living on rocks and start living on dirt that grows more than lichen, likely a messy mix of all of it. What we do know is that between the late 800s and early 1000s, Norse settlements spread like wild moss. The British Isles, Iceland, Greenland, and somewhere far off, something called Vinland. The stories swirl around campfires like sparks. Of Leif Erikson, not yet famous, but already the subject of at least 3 wildly conflicting songs. Of lands with forests so big you could get lost for years. Of grapes and wolves and people who live with the land, not against it. Of the edge of the world being not an end, but a beginning. You spend the day helping the departing families pack. It's bittersweet. Little kids wave wooden swords. Mothers double-check bundles of dried meat. One man insists on bringing his pet raven, which screams at you in what may be Old Norse. The goodbye hugs are rough, brief, awkward. This isn't a culture for long farewells. As the ship pulls away, the crowd cheers, not just out of pride, but out of possibility. These aren't just villagers anymore, they're part of a tide, a movement, a people spilling outward into the world like honey poured across a tilted map. Back at the village, the blacksmith is already planning new tools. Astrid is talking about establishing trade routes. Ranveig watches the horizon and mutters, "Ah, the gods are stretching their legs." You ask what that means. She just smiles and says, "It's going to get louder." And that night, as you sit by the fire, the stars seem brighter. Closer, you realize you're part of something now, something that began in whispers and chores and frozen toes and has turned into legend. You're not just in a story, you're helping write it. The fire tonight burns slower, lower, like it knows you're almost at the end. The longhouse is quieter than usual, not silent, but softer, like the village itself is exhaling. You're sitting on your usual spot near the hearth, hands warmed by the flames, face smudged with smoke and salt, watching the light flicker across the walls where stories used to live only in shadows. It's been months since you washed ashore, uninvited and unprepared, blinking through the brine with your modern memory and mismatched shoes. And now you can gut a fish in 4 motions. You know how to pack a ship's hull without crushing the cheese. You even tied a knot last week that didn't fall apart during the storm. People stopped laughing, mostly. The word Viking means something different now. Not just raiders, not just traders. It's a word that's grown into its own skin, part myth, part momentum. It means ambition, risk, legacy, and yes, sometimes very enthusiastic pillaging. But more than that, it means movement. You've seen a people stretch from isolated farms to floating villages, from firelit tales to full-blown sagas, from superstition to symbolic power. Their gods have grown, their boats have multiplied, and their sense of self has crystallized into something real. And as Ranveig once said while stirring a pot of something suspicious, once a people has a name, they start shaping history just to fit it. The expansion continues. New expeditions are planned to Iceland. Others whisper about Greenland, though most aren't entirely sure it's not just a particularly mossy hallucination. And the furthest, wildest rumor of all? Vinland, a place of wild grapes and warm soil. Some believe it's heaven, others think it's a trap set by gods who enjoy irony. You're helping draw maps now. Nothing precise, just ink on vellum, suggestions of coastline, little dots for here be pigs or good pine trees. Well, your handwriting is terrible, no one cares. The maps are just proof that the future is being shaped not by rulers, but by rowers. There's a moment, just before bed, when Astrid brings you a carved amulet. It's small, simple, a twisting knot of lines like a river that forgot how to end. Protection, she says, handing it over. Or confusion? The runes are old, they don't always agree with each other. You tie it around your neck without hesitation. Feels right. That night, you dream, not of the sea, but of a path through forests, where every tree speaks a different language and every river hums with stories. You wake feeling like someone else might have dreamed with you, someone with one eye and a raven. And as the village wakes, some to chores, some to ships, some to ideas, you know that your time here, this strange accident of arrival, has become something larger. You were meant to wash up here, not to teach, not to conquer, but to witness. You've seen where they came from, the cold soil, the rough meals, the quiet dignity. You've seen where they're going, into myth, into maps, into the wild unknown that lies between legend and logistics. And now as you stand one last time at the edge of the fjord, wind in your teeth, smoke in your clothes, you whisper the word one more time. Viking.
Not a job.
Not a curse. Just a story worth following. And now you're drifting back, not across the sea this time, but gently, softly, into rest. The fire behind you dims, the voices of the village grow quiet. You hear the soft slap of waves against the hulls, the distant laughter of someone spilling a bucket they swore was full of beer. You hear the breathing of the land, slow, ancient, steady.
You're not cold, not anymore. You're wrapped in fur, in story, in the rhythm of a people who dared to name themselves. You don't need to remember every face, every rune, every goat-related mishap. It's all part of the song now, stitched into the sail of something that moves, even when it sleeps.
The gods? Let them rest too. They've earned it. Odin can put down his spear. Thor can stop flexing. Loki? Well, he's probably still awake, but at least he's laughing from somewhere far off. You are not where you began. You are changed, a little softer, a little wiser, a little more okay with eating fish 17 different ways. So breathe, let the ice melt behind your eyes. Let the myths unravel into gentle dreams. The boats have sailed, the hearth has cooled, and the story, your story, has found its pause. We'll meet again, maybe in a colder land, or a stranger one, maybe with pharaohs or philosophers, or just more people trying to survive time with humor and heat.
But for now,
sleep well, my friend.